train a-comin', it's rollin' around the bend, and I ain't seen the sunshine since I don't know when. I'm stuck in Folsom prison, and time keeps dragging on. But that train keeps rollin' on down to San Anton. When I was just a baby, my mama told me, son, always be a good boy, don't ever play with guns. But I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. When I hear that whistle blowing, I hang my head and cry.
And welcome to the Folsom, El Dorado, and Sacramento Railroad Museum here at 9500 Greenback Lane, suite number 5. We're going to take you through a tour today of the museum, show you displays and layout and the history of the Sacramento Valley Railroad on up to the present day, and to give you a little bit of information that made the state of California, and especially Folsom here, famous.
I've been working on the railroad all the livelong day. I've been working on the railroad just to pass the time away. Can't you hear the whistle blowing? Rise up early in the morning. Can't you hear the captain shouting, China, blow your horn?
Here, first up, we have a layout of the historic railroad block in Folsom, which was actually the first railroad west of the Mississippi. And what you have here is an interpretive design of what it looked like back in the 1850s. Here we have a replica of the passenger station, which is still over there in Folsom right now. And we have the trains with as many as 23 stagecoaches each day coming in and out, as many as 12 to 14 trains a day as well, going from Folsom to Sacramento and back. Here we have the first turntable. This A-frame type that you have here took only one person and was operated by hand, obviously. Here we had the car shops in which most of the cars were designed and rebuilt and taken care of. Over on the side here we have the Perkins House, in which freight was loaded and offloaded for the gold area. As the passengers and equipment and materials would arrive from Sacramento, it would be detrained at this point here, and it would be dispersed throughout the gold country. On the side here with the picture, we have the new railroad plaza that is going to be built with the turntable there as the center of the hub, with the possibility of an operating turntable in which we will actually have live excursions and railroad line running from Folsom through to Latrobe and then further on up into Placerville.
Riding on the city of New Orleans, Illinois Central, Monday morning rail. 15 cars and 15 restless riders, 3 conductors, 25 sacks of mail. All along the southbound Odyssey, the train pulls out at Kankakee and rolls along past houses, farms, and fields, passing trains that have no name, and freight yards full of old black men, and the graveyards of the rusted automobiles. Good morning, America, how are you? Said, don't you know me? I'm your native son. I'm the train they call the city of New Orleans. I'll be gone 500 miles when the day is done. Dealing card games with the old man.
We have a picture here of Theodore Judah, who was the original engineer that laid out and developed the railroad line here from Sacramento to Folsom. Well, he was born in 1826 and he met an untimely death in 1863. But in the meantime of his short lifespan, he accomplished to build the Niagara Railroad, and then he moved to California here at the request of several entrepreneurs who wanted to see a railroad line to the gold fields and that to establish California and bringing the men and women and their families and the merchandise out to the west. In this diorama here, we have a picture of the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific meeting at a promontory summit May 10th of 1869, and the layout here is depicted of that. Pictures of the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific locomotives, the Jupiter and the 119. And basically it was called the Wedding of the Nation, with the Wedding of the Rails, where they linked up at Promontory, of which Mr. Judah was basically one of the chief engineers to initially start to lay out the line before he passed away. Here we have a replica of the turntable that's down on the railroad block right now. It's as to where it was rebuilt. And again, I said this is actually the second one. The first one originally in 1855 was a flat top, basically nothing more than just wood across the pit. It took 4 people to turn, but with this layout here, using what they call the A-frame or gallows style of turntable, it could be easily moved by one person with the full weight of the locomotive bearing in the center and onto the side rails here. And initially, when they first built the original turntable, the flat top, most of the locomotives that they had was approximately 47 feet in length, of which left the pilot and one of the tender wheels actually overhanging the edge, so that later on the Sacramento Valley Railroad had to actually expand the turntable perimeter, at which point then they put in this type of turntable here, making it much easier to handle.
But that train keeps rolling on down to San Anton. When I was just a baby, my mama told me, son, always be a good boy, don't ever play with guns. But I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. When I hear that whistle blowing, I hang my head and cry. I bet there's rich folks eating in a fancy dining car. They're probably drinking coffee and smoking big cigars. Well, I know I had it coming. I know I can't be free. But those people keep a moving, and that's what tortures me. If they freed me from this prison, if that railroad train was mine, I bet I'd move it on a little farther down the line, far from Folsom prison. That's where I want to stay. And I'd let that lonesome whistle blow my blues away.
The parts and the pieces that we've had made for the turntable here in Folsom, and that was actually one of the last jobs of the Knights Foundry before they closed, which Knights Foundry is in Jackson, and it was all operated by water. The second turntable here was actually its sister back in the late 1800s, and the patterns were taken off of the turntable there in Nevada, and that's what we used to make our castings with for this turntable here in Folsom. One of the interesting sidelights along this line here between Sacramento and Folsom and also up into Placerville was a car that they ran in the 1930s called the McKee Car. And it was basically a little bit ahead of its time, as it was a commuter type of car. Under self-powered, they could hook one, maybe even two of them together, and they would run from Sacramento to Folsom, then from Folsom on up to Placerville. And this car here was common throughout the line, and it handled X amount of passengers. And the funny thing about it was tried to be proven in aerodynamics, and they had everything right except that the direction of the car was wrong. If they would have turned around, put the front in the rear and the rear in the front, it would have been a pretty dynamic car. From Folsom itself, 5 different railroad lines. Here on this side, going towards Junction, which is now presently Roseville, was the California Central Railroad. From here we had the Sacramento, Placer, and Nevada Railroad going up towards the goldfields of El Dorado area. We also had the Sacramento Valley Railroad itself, and then we had the Placerville and Sacramento Valley Railroad. So all in all, there was actually 5 different railroad hubs from this point here, starting with the Sacramento Valley Railroad. Here we have a topographical map of the areas in which the railroad line ran, and actually from Sacramento down in here, came up into Folsom, and which point here was called a Y. Rather than using a turntable, they would turn with what they called a Y, where they could turn an entire train rather than just a locomotive or a car at a time. It ran from Sacramento to Placerville, a total of 54 miles, with Folsom again being the main terminal or the hub of the railroad. It would pass through valleys, creeks, streams, forest, up into Latrobe, at which point here they had an off branch for a lime plant, a quarry, went into Shingle Springs, then into Diamond Springs, and terminated in Placerville. And keeping up with the railroad line and that, what we've seen is a lot of past history, and now we're looking basically into the presence of the line. And what we have here is possibility of light rail as well as excursions, and this is what we're pushing for right now, is excursions as well as light rail, which should be into Folsom by the year 2001.
But that train keeps rolling on down to San Anton. When I was just a baby, my mama told me, son, always be a good boy, don't ever play with guns.
Good morning. My name is Bill Anderson. I'm president of the Folsom, El Dorado, and Sacramento Historical Railroad Association, commonly called the Feds. We're standing here this morning beside 2 rail vehicles we've brought into Folsom here to demonstrate and to test on the trackage, just find out how they operate, and hopefully the city of Folsom will be interested in acquiring these. We'll see after a couple of meetings with the city. We the Feds, as I mentioned, have a concept plan on an excursion train from downtown Sutter Street at the Turntable, the first turntable west of the Rockies, to Highway 50 and beyond to Latrobe. This may be a beginning of such an excursion train. These 2 vehicles, very adapted to this type of environment, economical, and a real revenue maker. And after that fact, we can possibly look into the operation of steam, a steam locomotive, and a train on to Latrobe. As I mentioned earlier, we have been working on a concept plan for an excursion train through Folsom into El Dorado County, hopefully to Latrobe, near Placerville. We have been working on this for 3 years, all part of the restoration of the Turntable in Folsom, the terminus of the first railroad west of the Rockies, the Sacramento Valley Railroad. So our concept plan for an excursion train has been coming along. There is equipment available out there in the world, and we are looking at tracks being reinstalled in places where they have been removed. And during this period, we came upon Jim Busby and his 2 vehicles. Originally, he had planned to utilize these vehicles on his own railroad in Calaveras County, but things didn't work as planned, so he also has another site that is interested in using his vehicles, and that's in Oregon State. Jim lives here in Sacramento, in the Sacramento area, and I approached Jim, he approached me. We sat and discussed the potential of the vehicles being used in the Folsom area. So we decided this is an ideal spot to demonstrate and give them a test run, since this is the first they've been used. And right now we'll have some visitors from the city of Folsom. So we're looking forward to this visit and to move on with a demonstration and test runs.
Okay, my name's Jim Busby, and my wife and I own a company called Scenic Rail Ventures here in Sacramento, and we own these two self-propelled cars that we're testing out here in Folsom.
And I'm former Assemblyman Larry Bowler, formerly the chairman of the Transportation Committee in the State Assembly, currently a private citizen and retired, but interested in rail.
These cars were originally built for Weyerhaeuser Corporation in Washington State, and they were used there for almost 20 years by Weyerhaeuser to move logging and railroad personnel in and out of the peninsula operation, because the area is so steep that they couldn't use roads. They had to rely on the railroad to move the cars, move the equipment. And these two cars served there for many years. Then the logging operation up there was closed down, and they became surplus, and they were moved off of the railroad. So we bought them with the intention of operating them down in Calaveras County on a line that we'd envisioned purchasing from Southern Pacific.
That was the old Kentucky House?
The old Kentucky House branch, that's right. And we wanted to buy the easternmost 14 miles of the line from Valley Springs up to the old cement plant at San Andreas. And we had entered into negotiations with SP and had a very working agreement with them that if they received a permission to abandon the line, that we would be considered for purchase of that, because it would be sold for scrap anyway. And along came Union Pacific, and to make a long story short, from there on it was very difficult to try and consummate a deal. So we abandoned that idea. That line has since been removed for scrap, and it's all gone now. So that left us with equipment, these two cars being some of that equipment, and we stopped our efforts for a while as far as restoring them and rebuilding them, because we didn't know where we were going to run them. And so about 2 years ago we decided to restart our efforts and finish the cars, and then look for a home for them. And we finished them the end of August, and here they are in Folsom.
Now you say we, is this a group of guys?
No, my wife and I pretty much have done most of the work on the cars. Once we moved them down from Washington State, we discovered that they needed extensive repair, mechanical. The bodies were not serviceable. They were just badly neglected. So we started from scratch, and the cars were completely torn down and rebuilt from the ground up.
Where did you do the rebuilding at?
Next to my house in Sacramento.
I understand.
I have very tolerant neighbors, so I'm very lucky in that respect. And up until the bodies were started to be assembled, you couldn't see them anyway, because they were on what was supposed to be the RV storage part of my yard.
So now you're in the process of demonstration runs, and is your intention to sell the cars?
That's correct. As part of Folsom's effort here to build up the railroad block area, these cars would be used for operation on the existing rail line and eventually be used to operate onto the railroad block on Sutter Street. And they would run back and forth on primarily excursion type operation, but they could be operated daily for transportation purposes also.
So you rebuilt all the stainless steel then, or is that aluminum?
Yeah, aluminum. Yeah, it's aircraft aluminum. And all the windows are all the FRA type glass, bullet resistant glass. And they were built, we've been looking at 2 places in Oregon actually to operate them as a tourist operation. And they were built for severe weather operation. The Oregon coast is not known for its light weather.
So this has just been a project of love on your part and your wife's part for rails.
We'd come up with the idea of running an excursion operation.
Now what size of an engine powers this?
This is powered by a Ford 300 cubic inch gas engine. It has an automatic transmission, power steering, power brakes. It's basically a truck on rails, all-wheel drive.
And one is a duplicate of the other?
Yes. The 2 cars operate independent of each other. They're not designed to tow or pull anything. They're strictly, like you said, gigantic speeders.
What you see here is called date nails, in which the railroads of different companies would take actually nails and drive them into the spikes with the date of which the ties were put down. There's different types of spikes for different types of railroad lines and different designs. Some of them are raised letters, some of them are etched letters, some of them are square heads, some of them are round heads. But basically the numbers would give them the time, not time, but the date as to when, like I said, the ties were put down. Here we have velocipede, in which was an early type of a hand truck. Prior to that they would mount on this thing here, and they could actually pump it on out to the tracks to where they needed to do repairs and things like that there. And this pretty much is a pretty old one, and it still works. Here we have the earliest, one of the earliest type of locomotive couplers and rail cars couplers on the railroad, and it was called Lincoln pin. Modern day has what they call knuckle couplers, where they'll actually grab, and they have also air brakes. Well, on the Lincoln pin they didn't have air brakes, and the brakes had to actually be set by hand on each car. So when the train wanted to stop, if it was going at any amount of speed, the brakeman would actually have to get on top of the cars and walk from car to physically set the brakes on each car to stop the locomotives. And this type of system here was a very dangerous system, and it was used on one of the railroads up in Placerville until 1950 something, when it was a logging railroad, and they finally had to shut them down because of it.
Well, you wake up in the morning, you hear the work bell ring, and I march you to the table. You see the same old thing. Ain't no food upon the table. There's no fork up in the pan. But you better not complain, boy. You get in trouble with the man. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a ever-loving light on me. Yonder come Miss Rosie. How in the world did you know? By the way she wears her apron and the clothes she wore. Umbrella on her shoulder, piece of paper in her hand. boys will bring you down. The next thing you know, boy, oh, you're prison bound. Oh, let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a hell of a loving light on me. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight